Hello friends, welcome to my talk. I'm very excited for this. Today we're going to talk about when not to use Next.js among another variety of associated topics. So a quick intro to me first. I'm Jeff. I work at HashiCorp where I work on web platform tooling, and I have two bunnies that are very adorable and small, as well as one also small and adorable 4-month-old baby girl. Pictures of any of the above adorable creatures are available by request in Discord. And with that, let us move on to the rest of the talk. You may be asking yourself now, how did they let this guy get away with doing a talk about when not to use Next.js? And to be quite honest, I have asked myself that same question several times throughout my process of thinking about and putting together this talk. And so the best answer I can give for you right now is that it's a little bit of a cheat. In order to understand the weaknesses and places where you shouldn't be using something, you really need to have a great understanding of the strengths and what that thing was built to do. And so I will be talking about, of course, both sides, what Next.js is great for, and therefore, by the inverse rule, what is not so great for. Good engineering, as we all know, is about properly evaluating the strengths and weaknesses of different tools and figuring out how they can be applied to solve different problems. So, regardless, so that I don't get kicked off of the air here, let's start off with talking about some of the strengths. I'm going to focus specifically on this talk on one key philosophical aspect of Next.js, which I'm calling hybrid architecture. There are, of course, a huge range of other really cool, interesting, and useful features that Next.js has, and hopefully we'll hear about a lot of those through the rest of the talks of this conference. In this talk specifically, though, I'm just going to focus on this one aspect because I feel like it's a really important differentiator for Next.js, and it's something that we can really dig into. It's a nice, juicy topic. So just keep that in mind. There's plenty else to talk about, but I only have limited time here, so we're going to keep this fairly focused. We're asking about hybrid architecture. What exactly am I talking about? Let's break it down a little bit. Frameworks have historically tended to couple themselves to one specific architecture. In this slide, I illustrate a classic divide between static and dynamic. Dynamic roughly meaning that views or pages can be generated on demand by a custom web server, with static meaning, on the other hand, that your views or pages are generated beforehand, before deployment, I should say, as part of a build process, and the artifacts are deployed and served directly to users. There are a few examples of popular frameworks shown on the slide, but there are hundreds of other tools and frameworks that can be used to build sites in the same way. The point that I'm trying to get at is that each one of these tools are targeted towards building websites with one of these two types of architectures specifically. And this divide couldn't be illustrated more clearly than in the fight between WordPress's founder, Matt Mullenweg, I hope I pronounced that correctly, and Netlify's founder, Matt Biilmann. And they just recently had a virtual debate about which one of these architectures and technologies are better at Netlify's conference. I didn't catch the video, but I got this screenshot that I found of their debate. I thought it was particularly funny that they both are blonde-haired gentlemen with beards talking in front of decorative bookshelves. But all joking aside, I do think it's great that they have had this opportunity to really break down different architecture styles and have a debate in the public about the pros and cons. So I support that it happened. Regardless, I'm going to dig pretty deep in my meme bag for this one, but I don't think for Next.js it actually matters which one is better or worse, because Next.js can handle either one of these types of architecture, which is why I call it hybrid architecture in the first place. If you want, you can take a Next.js code base and generate it into a fully static website with everything built before deployment. You also could take a Next.js code base and have it operate as a fully dynamic site. If you use get server-side props on every route, it will fetch all of your data and regenerate each page every time somebody looks at it. And what's more useful and interesting is that you don't have to go to one of those extremes exactly. You can take the entire gradient of experience in between and peg your pages anywhere in there that you need. In addition, you can take each one of your pages and peg it at a different point. One of your routes could easily be a fully dynamically generated route on demand, and several of your other ones could be fully static, and those can live side by side in the same app without any issues. So Next.js is really flexible because of this capability to handle hybrid architecture in this way. And it puts it in a really cool and unique position in the landscape of other website building frameworks. I wanted to put in this caveat here just because I know that the divide between static and dynamic is not as binary as I played it out to be. I put it that way to make a point. I know that you can take a dynamic site and put a cache on it and have it start to push into that boundary range in between dynamic and static. The reason that I do polarize it in this way, however, is that caches are not easy to deal with. There's a famous quote that goes, "There's only two hard things in programming, naming things and cache invalidation." And it surely didn't become famous for no reason. With tools like Ruby on Rails or WordPress, if you want to add caching, that typically involves pulling in a separate plugin of some sort or tool that you can manually configure the caches with. With Next.js, this isn't so much the case, and I like to compare it kind of to what React does for DOM manipulation. When you use React, the DOM is still being manipulated, but you're not the one calling the shots on it. Whereas with something like Backbone, if anyone remembers back that far, you would still be able to get two-way data binding, but you would need to write out each one of the DOM interactions. You would need to say where a node is inserted, where one's removed, where an event is added or removed. With React, they give you this more declarative model where you put in what you want the DOM to look like, and all of the actual mutations that are happening are pushed under the surface and are the framework's responsibility to deal with. Next.js and caches feels like a similar relationship to me. Obviously, there is caching or cache-like activity happening under the hood of Next.js, but you're not pulling in a caching plugin or configuring cache invalidation at any time when you work with Next.js. And so when you take that problem out of the equation, that alleviates a great weight, as you no longer are the one who has to deal with the exceedingly difficult problem of cache invalidation. Happy to dig more into this if anyone wants to talk about it on Discord, but for now I just at least wanted to put up some acknowledgement that there is some middle ground here and that it's not quite so black and white. Regardless, as I was kind of thinking through this whole multi or hybrid architecture concept, it reminded me of something that I learned when I came to work at HashiCorp. And so I wanted to take a minute to talk about that, just to draw a comparison between the two situations. And I promise this is not an advertisement for HashiCorp or anything that they asked me to add into the slides. It's just an interesting and relevant comparison. And for me, it helps me a lot to understand concepts when I have a comparison to draw on them. I think that's hopefully the case for others as well. So I'll try to be quick with some of the background. In general, if we switch our mindset on over from web development to DevOps and infrastructure, which is an adjacent but different kind of career field, there's a transition happening for large companies in that field, where previously code used to be deployed to servers that were on premises for those companies. So they would build a server rack and install servers in a closet or a warehouse, depending on the size of the company. And they would deploy all their infrastructure to those servers. as services like AWS came out and were followed quickly by Microsoft and Google's offerings, it was quickly understood that these offerings gave a lot of advantages over on-premise servers. Like scalability becomes easier, the pricing and costs go down, and overall companies started shifting largely to using cloud services instead of using on-premise solutions. I say that just as context. Let's get into the main point here. When you do that, you would think that it should be a straightforward transition, where users used to deploy code to their own servers that their own company owned, and then it changed over to them deploying to, say, Amazon servers instead. The reality was a little bit more complicated, though, because there are multiple players in the market. And even if a large company managed to put strict enough guidelines that would cause all of their teams and departments only to deploy to one cloud host, large companies often will make acquisitions. And as soon as they acquire a different company and want to integrate it into their service that uses a different cloud vendor than them, they suddenly get faced with this multi-cloud problem. Instead of just deploying to one cloud vendor, they now have to think about 2 or 3. And any sufficiently large company ultimately ends up having to deal with multiple different cloud vendors, which makes it much more difficult for their developers to work with code. Where HashiCorp tools come in is that they kind of serve as this intermediary layer here. And so the HashiCorp tools can interface with any of these cloud providers, but they give you a single consistent set of tools that developers can interact with instead of having to interact with multiple sets. And this specific transition here, where you go from 3+ different outputs to one output, is a really big bonus for developers working on things and adds a lot of consistency and a lot of convenience. And this shift here is behind a lot of HashiCorp's success in general. That being said, let's get to the actual comparison point. I felt like there is a strong similarity here with what NextJS is doing with web architectures. Normally, if you're building a large, complicated app, you either have to make the difficult decision to go all in on one architecture even when you don't need it, or you have to decide to split your app apart and deploy to multiple architectures. A prime example might be if you have a marketing page for your company's product, and then you also have a login. With the login, you might split it out into a different app on a different subdomain so that it could sit different than your marketing page, which is static. With Next.js, you don't have to deal with these types of splits anymore, because just like HashiCorp tools, it sits as this intermediary because it can put out multiple different architecture targets within the same app. So in the same way that HashiCorp tools offer great convenience and consistency for developers, Next.js does the same thing over the top of web architectures, which is what makes it so powerful and interesting of a tool. While I'm talking about HashiCorp, I want to tell one more story here, which is how my team decided to adopt it. My team does not work on HashiCorp tools and does not work on DevOps. Rather, we work on HashiCorp's websites, and we do web development. Right now, my team is working on 14 different websites. This is a lot of websites. In addition, all these websites have quite a diversity of different needs. We have a range from simple marketing pages to very complex marketing pages, to documentation sites with a variety of different needs with respect to versioning and search, to conference websites. We just had HashiConf earlier this month, and we have several other conferences internationally that also have their own unique set of needs. So we have a lot of different websites, and across those websites, there's quite a wide range of different requirements. On top of that, HashiCorp as a company is growing very quickly. There's a couple of pieces shown here, and this is no humble brag attempt, but rather just part of the context. I feel lucky to be at a company that's growing fast, but it also comes with its own set of problems. There are a ton of requests. There are a ton of people being added all the time. And my team is only 7 developers actively working on these 14 sites. So the question really becomes, how does a team of 7 devs keep up with the scale requirements of a hypergrowth startup while maintaining and innovating on 14 different websites? This is a really tough question. And the best answer that we could come up with when we were trying to figure out how the team would operate is to share as many things as possible between all of the websites in order to save time and be more efficient. And so what that came down to was creating a shared platform for all the websites. There are a bunch of different benefits of a shared platform, which I'll go through quickly now. Having a shared foundation to the sites allows you to fire up new sites quickly and easily. We have a template for all of our websites that can just generate a new website on the spot. We had 3 new websites we added for HashiConf, and so those were all pretty easily generated off the template, which is a really nice benefit. There's also shared tooling. Any of the tools that we use to pull data from our CMS or include and optimize images are all exactly the same between all of our different sites because they all use the same platform. This is really useful, and of course there are tons of other pieces of tooling that also can be shared in order to save time in this way. It's not uncommon that companies have component libraries or design systems, and we are among those. I think we couldn't survive without it. We have a library of React components that we build and include across all of our Next.js websites, which gives us a lot of consistency and saves us a lot of time on copy pasting or modifying, porting things to different styles. Shared knowledge is really important as well, and it kind of relates to the shared tooling. If you know how to include an image properly on one of our websites, you know how to do it on all of our websites, and that goes the same for all other techniques for doing things. And it also relates closely to the next point, which is more of a management point, but is still very important, that we can share dev resources. Say, for example, there was a big push to get one product release out that comes with a lot of extra websites or marketing details or features. If there's somebody who usually doesn't work on that website on the team and works on a different website, but that product doesn't have a major release coming up, we can shift that person over to work on the area where we really need more muscle. And in that way, we are able to be more effective with our allocation of resources. We're more flexible and we can adapt to changing needs of a fast-growing company. So the shared platform is absolutely essential to us being able to get things done, especially in an environment where things are growing and changing so fast and with such a small team. And really, our ability to do this depends entirely on having a framework that can accommodate such a diverse set of needs and that can accommodate such crazy amounts of scale. And so we're very thankful for Next.js being that platform. And this slide, I've listed a few different a few different features that have come up that we've been able to handle thanks to Next.js. We inherited a lot of static websites, and we have been able to port them over to Next.js, and as they've grown to thousands and thousands of pages, we can mitigate how much build time impact the additional pages have by making decisions on which pages we want to build ahead of time versus generate on demand. We can bring in plenty of data to that, such as when the page was last updated, when the data was changed, how popular that page is. There's tons of really cool things you can do to play with how you want to mess with large amounts of content. Public user profiles are traditionally a great challenge for static websites to handle. There's a large number of them. They're constantly being created and removed. They're based on fast-changing large data set, and they need to resolve well in social shares and on search engines, which means you need server rendering. So this has been really helpful as this requirement has come in for several of our sites for us to be able to handle it with no problem. Things like custom search and custom content based on the user fit in the same bucket. And these are things that we are able to deal with because of the fact that Next.js can handle this hybrid architecture problem. So now that I'm done talking about HashiCorp, I want to make one shameless plug here at least. which is that we are now hiring, fortunately. We've had a slot opened up for a couple of new spots on our team, which is very exciting. And I just want to give a quick pitch here while I can get away with it. HashiCorp is a really cool company. We're growing fast. We're very successful. We have a small, friendly team of developers. We are working on a bunch of Next.js sites. We work closely with the Vercel team on Next.js features and architecture. We'll often beta test their features. We're really pushing Next.js to its limits. And if this sounds like a type of environment that you're interested in, definitely come chat with us in Discord on the HashiCorp Careers channel, or really, you're welcome to just reach out to me directly or go to any HashiCorp channel. So that's all. Let's keep moving. I want to get back to the title of this talk because I think we've drifted pretty far away from it. I feel like we've sufficiently explored how powerful this concept of hybrid architecture can be and what the strengths are of Next.js. So let's get back to what we were talking about and the weaknesses. Before I do that, I need to take one little tangent to set up some context for this though. So I think we have this problem in the industry where there's a pervasive attitude that's acceptable where people can say we should use X tool for everything. And I want to go through a fun montage to demonstrate the wide scope and range of this problem. So here we go. I'm going to start with Rails, using Rails for everything. Why use Ruby on Rails and why it's better. Here's from the Rails website itself. Rails has everything you need. Maybe you should use Rails instead. This is Jamstack now, the modern way to build websites and apps that delivers better performance. That doesn't sound like a tool that solves one problem. It sounds like it solves every problem. And indeed, a scroll further down the page, we reach the declaration that Jamstack is the new standard architecture for the web. It's a pretty drastic statement. Use Netlify for everything. Use Gatsby for everything. This is a good one. Most successful people use Gatsby to build their web apps. What about unsuccessful people? They don't use Gatsby to build their web apps. Interesting. From the founder, just use Gatsby for everything. Back to Jamstack, the cornerstone of modern day web development. Start picking on React a little now. Use React for everything. React for everything. React for everything. What's the biggest lie you've heard from a programmer? We should use React for this. Why you should learn React instead of Jquery. And here we can see that there's some frustration with the amount that React has been used for everything. This is certainly not the only article that says this. Stop using React for everything. Pick on Next.js a little bit. The future of React, I think it's the future of itself, and React is the future of React. And the last two I think are really funny, so I'll give everyone a moment to read these through. This was an email that James had received from a recruiter saying, we're looking to build a new kind of job site. We want it to be easy to use, fast, and reliable. So we've decided to build it using Git instead of PHP. Just wonderful. And finally, I think this one is probably quite familiar to anybody who's built open source projects, but the classic, we should use TypeScript. I'll open up a PR to convert to TypeScript. This is all over the place. I didn't even begin pulling up tweets about this because I think we've gone through enough. But hopefully you get what I'm trying to say here. I don't want to see this type of statement anywhere. I don't think that this is responsible, reasonable, or accurate in any way. Rather than irresponsibly advocating for Next.js by saying it should be used for everything, I think that we as a community should agree, hopefully, on the fact that a more reasonable and responsible recommendation is to say, use Next.js where it shines, not for everything. We've spent some time talking about where Next.js shines, so let's sum it up here. We know that Next.js, due to its hybrid architecture, has super high flexibility. And that flexibility is really useful for when you need to scale. What we didn't quite talk about as much earlier is the fact that Next.js is a growing, evolving, changing framework, and that's great. It means we get a lot of new features. We will get some at this very conference, which are super exciting. But if you don't have a website that you're updating more than maybe once a year, less than that, handful of times a year, this benefit for us, for me at least, kind of turns into a drawback. Every time you come to touch your site, there's breaking changes you have to work around, and you didn't need those features in the first place. So really, you're targeting this type of website, a set of websites that requires flexibility, or a single website that you know is going to scale and requires flexibility, and a website that's being worked on actively. This is where Next.js really shines, specifically, for me at least. And now we can look at the converse where Next.js does not shine. So anything that's a small, straightforward website, websites that don't have plans for aggressive growth and scale, websites that are not frequently updated, not heavily maintained. And of course, any website that doesn't have a need for React in the first place, as Next.js is a React framework. It's not really a great fit for Next.js. You may think that I'm just paying lip service to Next.js here, saying, oh, well, most sites that are important have a need for Next.js, whereas small, trivial websites don't. But I really don't think that could be further from the truth. This category of website comprises a very large portion of the internet. Honestly, I would think it would be the majority. And so these are really important websites, and there is a very large segment of the market that is not appropriate for Next.js to be used for. So please don't think that this slide is me downplaying it's not shine use cases. It certainly is anything but that. I want to add one caveat, however, to this, which is that I know that often developers will use their personal websites or blogs as a place where they experiment with new technologies. And I want to say, that's great, that's fine. As long as you're doing it with clear eyes, you should use and experiment with new technologies on your own site freely, even if those technologies aren't ultimately the best possible fit for your personal site. If you have a small personal website that you update a handful of times a year, that's probably in the category of not being appropriate for Next.js. It certainly is in that category. However, if it's your own website and you're using Next.js on there to experiment with Next.js and get a feel for it, that's totally appropriate. Where the line is drawn is when you're being paid to do the work. If a company is paying you to make them a website, that's probably not the right time to be experimenting. So make sure you think about your architecture carefully, apply it in the right way, but don't let that stop you from experimenting when you are expressly experimenting on something that's intended for that purpose. We've gone through a lot here today, so I just want to take a minute to kind of wrap up some of the main points a little bit. Hopefully some of you will recognize this lovely image to the left. So first, Next.js's hybrid architecture concept kind of abstracts you up a level above all of the range of different architectures you could target and allows you to target multiple architectures out of a single build, which is really useful and gives you a very powerful interface, especially for websites or web apps that need a lot of flexibility or need to be able to scale up. This capability is particularly useful. It is not the solution to all of everybody's problems. Please don't say this. Let's advocate responsibly for Next.js. This is really important. Finally, small, straightforward websites without specific need for high scale and high flexibility, probably not the right fit for Next.js. It's not the use case that it was built for. And that's just about it. So thank you so much for listening to me and for checking out this talk and for coming to the conference. I'm super grateful to be here. I will be in Discord ready to chat about any of these ideas or concepts or answer any questions. So hit me up. I'll be there waiting. And thank you again. Enjoy the rest of the conference.